just in case either your connection drops out or if you miss out little bits. So, Nathan, over to you, and enjoy.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Evening to everyone. Again, echo Matt's words. Thank you very much for taking the time out for tonight. Similar to last Monday's session, we're going to be tackling 14 laws tonight, and in doing so, laws 15 to 28. So a few more exciting laws than last Monday. We will try and get this knocked over and done with by 8:30, but obviously any questions are welcome. If you can just pop your hand up, as Matt said, or your virtual hand up, and or type your question into the chat. We'll try and get to those probably towards the end of each law as we go through. All right, so here are the laws we'll be covering tonight. As I said, they're a little bit more exciting than last week's, but also some pretty key ones in terms of understanding the laws, and in particular understanding where the laws differ from your local playing conditions or regulations. Again, like I did last week, I will preface this by saying this is what's written in the laws, not what is written in your playing condition or regulations. You need to know those separately to this and know where they apply in difference to the law. All right, picking up where we left off last week, we'll go straight into Law 15, which is around the declaration and forfeiture of innings. So 15.1 deals with the time of a declaration of an innings. So the batting captain can declare their innings closed at any time when the ball is dead, and is considered a completed innings. And likewise, with a forfeiture of an innings, the batting captain can forfeit that at any time before the commencement of that innings taken place, and is a completed innings as well. The important thing with both a declaration and a forfeiture is that the batting captain needs to inform both the opposing captain and the umpires of that decision. And once that decision is made and the captain notifies those respective stakeholders, it can't be changed.
That's a plural, Nathan, both umpires.
Correct. However, as we spoke about last week, informing one umpire is sufficient under the laws to pass that information along. Moving into Law 16, 16.1 and 2, pretty straightforward. So depending on whether you're playing a one innings match, which is 16.2, or a two innings match, 16.1, basically whichever side has the most runs wins. Law 16.3 talks to where the umpires may need to award a match. So a match is lost when a side concedes defeat or, in the opinion of the umpires, refuses to play. Where the umpires consider that actions by a player or players might constitute a refusal to play, we need to go and ascertain the cause of the action. So why is it that a team might be delaying coming out after a break or something like that? If the umpires then decide that that action constitutes a refusal to play, they'll award that match to the opposing side. If the umpires decide that the delay is not a refusal to play, we'll obviously get on with things as soon as we possibly can. I've made a slight typo there in the first thing. So the playing time between calls of time and then subsequent call of play won't be counted as lost. The succession time on that day is extended by the length of time. Obviously, the match was delayed wherever applicable, and no overs are deducted from the last hour of the match if that applies solely on account of this time. As we spoke about last week, there are matches that are played under an agreement rather than just your basic 1 innings, 2 innings game. Where that takes place, any match where an agreement is made around the number of innings, the result and how that result comes about will also be laid down in that agreement. For anything else, a tie or a draw. So the important thing to note here, so a tie is when all innings have been completed and the scores are equal. And a draw is where a match concludes and the result is not determined in any other method that we've already spoken about. In terms of when a match actually ends, so the winning hit or extras. Once a result is achieved under Law 16, effectively when a winning hit is completed, the match immediately concludes at that point. So it's important to know that if a boundary is scored before the batters have completed sufficient runs to win, the whole of the boundary allowance is scored. So, for example, if there was 1 run to win and a player hits the ball to the boundary, if they complete 1 run before the ball reaches the boundary, then the game is over at the conclusion of that 1 run. However, if they don't complete that run and the ball goes to the boundary, they're out. Well, they score 4 runs, and the match is concluded by that point as well. In terms of the statement of the result, so if the side that bats first wins the game, the result is stated as a win by however many runs. Side batting second wins, the result is stated as a win by however many wickets are remaining. And if a team wins via penalty runs, the result is stated as a win by penalty runs. As we spoke about last week, the correctness of the result is the responsibility of the umpires and our job to ensure the correctness of scores, which falls into also 16.9, so around any mistakes in scoring. So in the event that we come off the ground at the end of the game, or what's perceived to be the end of the game, and we work out that in fact the scorers have recorded 2 6s that should have been 4s. And as a result, we actually have, or the side batting second requires an additional 4 runs to win the game, providing that there's playing time and or overs, depending on the game that you're playing, that remain in the day's play. Play may recommence if that is discovered, and there's no time or overs lost in this instance. However, if the playing time and overs are completed, no further play can take place, and the umpires are to advise both sides of the result of the match. The most important thing, though, is that once, as the umpiring group, we've agreed on the correctness of the score, and ultimately then the result of the match result cannot be changed under the laws of cricket. And that is Law 16 complete. I actually can't see hands on this, Matt. Have we got anything there, or we're good to keep going?
John, you've got your hand up there. You take yourself off mute.
Yeah, these days the QCUSA umpires actually sign the scorebook or just take a note of the scores?
No, we just take a note of the score. We're not required to sign the scorebooks. Under the law, as long as you're satisfied that the score is correct, there's no need to sign a scorebook.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. All right, we'll move on to Law 17, which is all about the over. Now, I know a lot of us have trouble counting 2-6, but an over does consist of 6 legal deliveries. And an over starts or is considered started when the bowler starts their run-up or starts their action in the event of them not having a run-up. In terms of what actually counts towards one ball on the over, ultimately a ball cannot count as part of the over if it's not delivered, even though a batter may be dismissed under other parts of the law. So, for example, the non-striker being run out, that ball doesn't count as part of the over. Likewise, a ball can't count as part of the over if it becomes dead before the striker has an opportunity to play at it. The ball is a no ball or a wide, or where the law under 24.4, which we'll get to later tonight, 28.2, which we'll also get to later tonight, or 41.4 or 41.5 around distraction or obstruction of the batters applies. Obviously, for anyone who's been around cricket for more than about 3 seconds, should know that we call over at the end of 6 legal deliveries. However, if we somehow bugger that up, which we all do from time to time, where there is a miscount, the number of balls bowled in the over as counted by the umpires will stand. So if you happen to count 5 balls, that doesn't matter. We don't go back and bowl a 6th. And likewise, if we bowl 8 in an over, we don't just disregard the last 2 balls of an over. The most important thing is that to understand is if there is a miscount and the umpire allows the over to continue after 6 valid balls have been bowled, they may call over when the ball becomes dead on a subsequent delivery, even if that previous delivery was not valid. So let's say you've had 6 legal deliveries in an over and you allow a 7th ball to be bowled, which is a no ball. Even though under the law we would re-bowl a delivery that's a no ball, because we've miscounted and we have had 6 valid balls in that over, we can call over and move on and just put it down to some pretty ordinary counting. Around the bowlers changing ends, so a bowler may change ends as often as they so like, providing they don't bowl 2 consecutive overs or bowl parts of 2 consecutive overs in the same innings. And other than at the end of an innings, a bowler will finish the over in progress unless incapacitated or suspended. However, in the event of any interruption or interval that results in over being left uncompleted, it will be completed on the next resumption of play. As we spoke about just before, in the event of a bowler being incapacitated or suspended during an over, another bowler may complete that over or part thereof, providing that law 17.6 is not contravened by they haven't bowled the previous over, they won't bowl the next over or part thereof. And that's law 17.
So Nathan, we had a question from Doug, which he's put in the chat. And he said, with electronic scoring, do you require a paper copy at the same time?
No, you don't, is the long and short of it under the laws. Unless your playing condition requires otherwise, electronic scoring is sufficient.
Yep. I guess the key is making sure that the scores match.
That's right, absolutely. At the end of the day, as we've said the last couple of nights, the important part is it's our job as umpires to ensure that the scores are true and correct based on the 2 resources that we should have, being the score books or form thereof. And as long as they both agree how they come to do so, we really don't mind.
Wonderful.
Excellent. All right. We will move into Law 18, which is all about scoring runs, which as a batter I love to do, except if I was in the field watching other people do it. So 18.1 just covers off where or what constitutes a run. So a run is scored where as often as the batters cross and make good their ground from end to end, a run is scored, where a boundary is scored, or when penalty runs are awarded. 18.2, to put it politely, is probably just some technical jargon to advise you that runs can be disallowed or not scored wherever applicable in the laws. But the key point being that when runs are disallowed, the penalty for a no ball or a wide will always count, as will any other penalty runs, excluding Law 28.3, which we will get to later this evening. 18.3 talks about what a short run is. So a short run, as defined in the laws, is a run where a batter fails to make good their ground before turning for a further run. And although a short run shortens the succeeding run, the latter, if completed, is not considered short. So effectively, if we run 2 runs, even though one of the batters has got a bit of a head start on the second run, the second run is not immediately considered a short run. So each short run, for want of a better term, is an individual act. Applying to the first run only, a striker can set off from in front of the popping crease without penalty. So the striker does not have to go back to the popping crease to commence their first run. The next part of the law talks to unintentional short runs. As we just said before, so short run, so unless a boundary is scored, in which case we don't really care about the runs ran, but we will get to where that does apply sometimes shortly. The umpire concerned shall signal short run when the ball is dead. The important thing to note, just in terms of scoring though, and good technique, is that the bowlers and umpire should be the one to signal to the scorers. Where you have a scenario where both batters run short in the same run, it is regarded as only 1 short run, not 2. And in the event you have more than 1 short run in any particular delivery, the umpire is to inform the scorers of the number of runs to be scored. Deliberate short runs. So this one, we actually talk to a bit of a penalty to the batting side, because it's obviously a deliberate act to try and obtain more runs. So once the ball is dead, if you determine that a short run is deliberate, you are to disallow all runs to the batting side, return any not out batter to their original end, signal no ball or wide as appropriate, repeat the short run signal to the scorers, award 5 penalty runs to the fielding side, and then any other 5-run penalty applicable to that particular delivery, excluding Law 28.3. Inform the scorers of the number of runs to actually be scored. Inform, obviously, the stakeholders, so the 2 captains, and report the incident to the governing body. 18.6, we're not going to get into, because again, it's a bit more technical jargon around when runs will be awarded for penalties and when runs will not be awarded for penalties. So that just, if you read each incident in full in the laws, 18.6 should come as zero surprise to you. 18.7 talks to runs scored for boundaries, and obviously we'll score any runs for boundary allowances as per Law 19, which we'll get to very shortly. Runs scored for when a batter is dismissed. Obviously, any runs for penalties when a batter is dismissed apply to either side, irrespective of the dismissal. However, no other runs will be awarded to the batting side except for when a batter is dismissed via obstruction, in which case any runs completed before the offence will be scored, unless the obstruction prevents a catch from being taken, in which case we'll get into that particular law next week. And if a batter is dismissed run out, obviously any runs completed before the wicket was fairly broken will be scored as well, unless a striker with a runner is themselves dismissed run out. But we'll get into runners and all the fun stuff around runners later on tonight. Runs scored when the ball becomes dead other than at the fall of a wicket. So any penalties are to be scored except for Law 23.3 and 28.3. So 23.3 being about where leg byes are not awarded, which we'll get into very, very shortly. And additionally, the batting side is credited with all runs completed before the incident or call of the dead ball, and the run in progress if crossed at the incident or call of dead ball. So as an example of this, one that occurred in the Women's Big Bash a couple of seasons ago, the batter has hit the ball down to long on, and as they're running through for a single, they've just crossed, and the batter has rolled their ankle and fallen down in a heap, and unable to continue. So the umpires, because of the injury to the player, have called dead ball. And what has occurred there under the laws of cricket is that because that run in progress, the batters had crossed, the batting side were credited with that run. Law 18.10 just talks to where runs are credited to. So if the ball is struck by the bat, all runs scored will be credited to the striker, except for any penalty runs, including obviously the 1-run penalty for a no ball. If the ball is not struck by the bat, runs are scored as either penalty runs, byes, leg byes, no ball, extras, or wides where appropriate. Just important to note, obviously, where byes and leg byes accrue off a delivery that's a no ball, only the 1-run penalty is scored as a no ball, and we'll get into byes and leg byes shortly. And obviously the bowler's statistics are credited with any runs scored by the striker, the no ball extra for a delivery that is a no ball, and any wides. Law 18.11. So I've put the law here in its entirety, just because there was a change to this as part of the 2022 new laws that have come in. So when a striker is dismissed in any of the circumstances in this particular law, the not out batter shall return to their original end. And what this law has done has included caught and obstructing the field, where the obstruction and distraction prevents the striker from being out caught. So the important thing to note here is, so high catch, normally we would need to watch for the cross to take place to see who would be on strike for the next ball. That now no longer applies. The new batter is always the one on strike unless it's the end of the over. Uh, 18.12, just because cricket has to be difficult. So when a batter is dismissed in any of the ways in 18-12-1-1, they shall return to their original end, but only if the batsman not already crossed. So that's for run-outs and things like that. So where they're miles out and haven't actually crossed at the point where the dismissal takes place. And that is Law 18. Before we get into 19, John, you've got your hand up there again.
Yes, you mentioned there before when an over's been miscounted and you realise it and the next ball is a no ball. In limited overs game, who then gets the free hit? Is it the very next ball of the next bowler, or is it the first ball of that same bowler when he next bowls?
So you would have to refer to your playing condition as to whether that's addressed, John, because the free hits aren't actually mentioned in the laws. I would suggest that if you've miscounted, the free hit is null and void because that ball should not have been delivered.
Okay. Thank you.
And Nathan Allison also put a question in the chat around deliberate short runs. So she asked, how would you know if it was a deliberate short run?
That's a pretty good question, and to be honest, it's a hard one to sort of provide some context to. You would have to know that there was genuine malice, and also an intent to ensure maybe a particular batter was on strike. So, for example, if it was the last over in a T20 and we wanted the batter that was 60 not out to be on strike, we might have the other batter deliberately touch down short to make sure that they got to the non-striker's end. But you would need to have clear intent that short run is intentional.
I think there was a situation in the Big Bash League last season where may well have been, I think it was Hobart, and we had somebody who was very slow on the first run and they turned 4 or 5 metres short of their pop increase and went back for their second run. So that was adjudged to be deliberate by the umpires on that match.
Yeah. And I suppose, again, it just comes down to there would be clear intent, and I would apply common sense to that intentional short run clause.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
No dramas. All righty. Let's move into Law 19, which is all about boundaries. And this is always one to brush yourself up on, given that we're coming into BBL season. So 19.1 just talks to determining what is the boundary. So obviously we do that as part of our conversations with the captains prior to the toss. But the important thing is that no part of a sight screen should be within the field of play. So if we think back to the good old days of Steve Waugh taking a catch pretty much behind the sight screen, that's no longer allowed under the laws of cricket. So that sight screen now must be outside the field of play at all times. Uh, 19.2, so identifying and marking the boundary. So obviously the boundary, where possible, should be marked by means of a continuous white line or by an object in contact with the ground. And for any implement that actually defines or identifies the boundary is the inside edge of that particular implement. So if we've got a continuous white line, it's the inside edge facing the field of play. If we've got cones, it's the inside edge and an imaginary line between those cones. But the important thing that's come into 19.2 is just around someone or something coming onto the field of play while the ball is in play. So let's use an example where ball gets hit out to deep cover in a final, and someone who's had an absolute skinful decides he's going to jump onto the field and interfere with play. Under the old laws, that would automatically be considered a boundary if it was going to go to the boundary. However, the law now says that that's not necessarily the case. The umpires are to make a decision for each separate occurrence where something like that happens. So there's no mandatory requirement for that sort of incident to be considered a boundary under the new laws. Uh, 19.3, just around restoring the boundary. So if a solid object is used to define the boundary and it's disturbed, the boundary, irrespective of where that object ends up, is still considered to be the original position, but it should be returned to that original position as soon as practicable. So if we've got a rope that defines the boundary, and in trying to save it a fielder dives into the rope and disturbs it, irrespective of how long that rope remains disturbed, the boundary is considered where that rope stood for the purposes of what is and what isn't a boundary. Now, ball grounded beyond the boundary. So 19.4 and 19.5, which talks to 19.5 talks to the fielder being grounded beyond the boundary, and 19.4 speaks specifically to the ball. So to make it crystal clear, the ball is grounded beyond the boundary when it touches any part of the object used to mark the boundary, the ground beyond the boundary, or any object grounded beyond the boundary. When the ball is in play, it's also considered to be grounded beyond the boundary if a fielder who is grounded beyond the boundary, and we'll get into the definition of that very shortly, touches the ball, or a fielder after catching the ball within the boundary becomes grounded beyond the boundary while in contact with the ball before completing the catch. So just before we get into some examples of that, we'll go into 19.5, which talks about fielders' actions around the boundary. So a fielder is grounded beyond the boundary if their person is in contact with either the boundary or any object used to mark the boundary, similar to the ball, the ground beyond the boundary, and any object that is in contact with the ground beyond the boundary. And then ultimately a fielder who is not in contact with the ground is considered to be grounded beyond the boundary if their final contact with the ground before their first contact with the ball was not entirely within the boundary. So if we think about fair catch as an example, and we've seen plenty of these in the Big Bash in recent seasons, a fielder, if they want to step outside the boundary to complete a catch, must first make contact with the ball entirely within the boundary, and then may step out providing they no longer touch the ball, exit the field of play for a short period of time, come back in and take that catch within the boundary. But the minute that they are beyond the boundary and come into contact with the ball, they are considered grounded beyond the boundary and a boundary is scored. Likewise, for those who are still living under the old school style of having a fence or something like that as your boundary, if a fielder is leaning on a fence and takes a catch, that is considered grounded beyond the boundary. It's a fun one to try and get your head around. 19.6 talks to the allowances for boundaries, and that's obviously boundary 6 or boundary 4 unless we agree otherwise, and 19.7 in terms of the runs scored for that. So boundary 6 is given for a ball crossing beyond the boundary before touching the ground, and boundary 4 for crossing beyond the boundary after touching the ground. The only time that this is different or further runs may be awarded over and above the boundary 4 or the boundary 6 is if the batting side have completed more runs than the boundary allowance at the point the boundary is scored. So, for example, a ball might roll really slowly out towards the boundary, and the batting side may complete 5 runs at the point the ball hits the rope. They are awarded 5 runs, not just 4, providing that they have either completed 5 runs or they are in the progress of running the 5th run and they have crossed. The last part of Law 19 just talks to overthrows, or what we would otherwise call a willful act from a fielder. So in the event that a boundary is scored as a result of a willful act of a fielder or overthrows, the runs awarded to the batting side are obviously the allowance for the boundary, so 4 runs. The runs that are completed by the batters, and the run in progress if the batters had crossed at the moment of the instant of the act or throw. So we would have obviously seen in the 50 over World Cup where this law was applied incorrectly. So for that, basically what occurred in that scenario, for those who didn't see it, ball was hit out to deep mid-wicket. The batters had completed 1 run and were in the progress of running a second, but hadn't crossed at the point the ball was thrown. The ball came into the wicketkeeper. It came off the bat or person of the batter and went away for 4. Now, the law was incorrectly applied because the batting side were awarded 6 runs, where they should have been awarded 5. The other important thing about this law is also around 18.12.2, which is who goes to what end. So in the event the batters have crossed, well, they go to the end that they're running to. If they haven't crossed, they go to the end that they were at the start of that run. And that's Law 19. John, looks like you got your hand up again, mate. You got another question?
No, sorry.
No, all good, mate. Thank you. All righty. Nothing new in the chat, I don't think. So let's get into Law 20, dead ball. So in terms of when a ball is dead, so we've got here, obviously, the ball's dead when it settles in the hands of the keeper or the bowler. When a boundary is scored, a batter is dismissed. When a ball becomes trapped between the bat and the person of the batter, or between items of their clothing or equipment, irrespective of whether the ball is played at or not. When the ball lodges in the clothing or equipment of the batter or the clothing of an umpire, where required under the laws, so Law 24.4 and 28.2, which we will get to shortly, when there's a contravention of 28.3 around helmets belonging to the fielding side, when the match is concluded, but ultimately and above all else, in the opinion of the bowlers and umpires, when the ball is dead. So sucked into all you poor square leg folk. Unfortunately, under the laws, your opinion doesn't mean anything. It all comes down to the opinion of the bowlers and umpire as to whether the ball is dead or not. In terms of when the ball is finally settled, so when we talk about that, so when it's settled in the keeper's gloves or the bowler's hands, that's a decision for the umpire and the bowler's end umpire to decide alone. I would hope we already know about 20.3, which is we shouldn't call over or time until such time as the ball is dead. I've included all of 20.4 because there is a change here under the 2022 laws. So 20.4 talks to when either umpire is required to call and signal dead ball under the law, the ball is considered to be dead at the instant of the incident causing the ball to become dead. However, where the law specifically provides for a call to be delayed, so as to not disadvantage the non-offending side, i.e. Restrictions on the striker's runner, runs permitted from balls lawfully struck more than once, unfair actions, unacceptable conduct, the ball will be considered to be dead at that point of the call. So I suppose the example that I would most often use, let's say a short ball comes in, hits the batter flush in the helmet, they go down like a sack of spuds. They're out of their ground and the fielding side attempt to try and run them out. The ball is dead because ultimately there's been a serious injury to the batter. The game doesn't need to wait for you to call dead ball anymore. The ball is considered dead at the instance that incident occurred, so i.e. when that player went down with that serious injury. Law 20.5, so when the ball ceases to be dead, or in other words, when is the ball brought back into play? That happens when the bowler starts their run-up or action if they have no run-up. Law 20.6 is also a new part of the 2022 laws. So once the ball is dead, no revoking of any decision can bring the ball back into play for that delivery. So for example, you give a batter out LBW, and as you're putting the finger up, you realise that you've made a terrible mistake and immediately reverse that decision. In that period of time, the ball's gone down to fine leg. The batters now can't take a run, and that ball is back in play and that run counts. So once the ball is dead under the laws, it can't be brought back into play. Uh, 20.7 talks to when a dead ball actually counts as one valid ball in the over. So as we said before, around what constitutes a valid delivery, a ball can't be counted as one in the over if the batter hasn't had an opportunity to play at it. However, under the law, unless a no ball or wide is called, the ball is valid and counts as one in the over, unless you have the scenario of law 20.4.2.6, so the striker is distracted by noise or movement. 24.4, a player returning without permission. 28.2, the legal way to field a ball. And 41.4 and 41.5 around distraction and obstruction of a batter. And that's the dead ball law. And John, you've got your hand up, mate.
Yeah, I've heard various stories of this, but I think I know what it is. You've got a ball bowled. In the opinion of you as the umpire, you believe it's hit the bat. There's no appeal made. The ball's become dead. Comes back to the bowler. And just before he starts his run up, he says, "How was that, umpire?" I believe that's a valid appeal at that time, and you must answer it even though the ball is dead. Is that correct?
That is correct. So if we go back to last week's learnings on decisions and appeals. An appeal of how's that covers obviously all dismissals, and that can be done at any point up until the ball is ready to be brought into play for the next delivery.
Yep, correct. Thank you.
No problem. All righty, we'll get into Law 21, which is all things no balls. So 21.1 talks to the mode of delivery. So a bowler must inform you of which arm they intend to use and the mode of delivery. So i.e. right arm over or right arm around the wicket. Failing to notify the umpire of a change to this is a no ball. And under the laws, obviously, no underarm bowling. Thank you very much, Trevor, for that particular part of the law. 21.2 talks to a fair delivery around the arm. So balls obviously can't be thrown. And in terms of what constitutes a ball being thrown, during the delivery swing, the elbow joint is not straightened, whether partially or fully, beyond the 15 degrees. And obviously doesn't debar a bowler from flexing or rotating their wrist. And whilst it would be logical for the square leg umpire to call a no ball under the laws, both umpires are able to do so. The important thing about suspect or incorrect actions is use the doubtful bowling action procedure as provided by Queensland Cricket. This again is just talks to what the laws allow for, but you need to use those procedures in line with your local competition and your local association's expectations. 21.3 tells you what to do in the event you call a bowler for throwing or delivering a ball underarm. So first thing with the first offence is obviously it's a no ball and it's a first and final warning. And the subsequent offence to that, call no ball, that bowler is to be suspended from the attack for the remainder of the innings and a report through to the governing body. Law 21.4 captures the old Law 41. This is going to test my knowledge of the old laws. 41.16, I believe, which is around running the striker out before the ball is bowled. So as a reminder, that procedure under the law still exists. However, for the purposes of clarity, that throw towards the striker's end is now no longer a no ball. It is a dead ball. Uh, 21.5, a fair delivery in terms of the feet. The back foot, back foot must not touch the return crease in any way, shape or form. And for the front foot, you must have at some point some part of the foot behind the popping crease, whether grounded or raised, and on the same side as the return crease, or in other words, not on the other side of the middle stump, whether grounded or raised. Uh, 21.6, so if a ball is delivered and the non-striker is not out, run out, the ball shall be called a no ball if the bowler breaks the wicket at the non-striker's end at any time from when the ball comes into play until after the completion of the stride following the delivery stride. So basically their first step onto the wicket after they bowl the ball. And this is inclusive of any equipment. So if a towel falls off as part of their action and knocks the bails off at the non-striker's end, it's a no ball. They don't physically have to kick or disturb the stumps in any way. Uh, 21.7, and I did see Jeff Simmons on the call tonight. So this is one that Jeff and I dealt with just yesterday, actually. So law 21.7, so ball bouncing more than once, rolling along the ground or pitching off the pitch. So if a ball bounces more than once or rolls before it reaches the popping crease, it is a no ball. And if a ball pitches partially or wholly off the pitch before it reaches the line of the striker's wicket, it is also a no ball. The important thing to remember is where the ball ceases to be a no ball. So when the ball bounces more than once, so we're just talking about the ball remaining on the wicket, just bouncing multiple times or rolling, it's the popping crease. For the part of the law around where the ball pitches, it's the line of the striker's wicket. In our example yesterday, we had a ball bounce for a second time just beyond the popping crease, and the batter was subsequently out stumped. Uh, 21.8. If the ball stops before the striker's wicket, it will also be called dead ball in addition to no ball. One thing that hasn't copied across from my notes in law 21.8 is also around the striker physically leaving the pitch. So just as a reminder to everyone, under the 2022 rewrite, a batter cannot leave the pitch area to play at a wild delivery. And if we think about the example of junior cricket where the leg spinner comes on, bowls the big loopy ball that ends up sort of at a short leg position, the batter can't leave the pitch area any longer to go and whack that for four. Once they leave the pitch, it's a dead ball. Law 21.9, a fielder intercepting a delivery. So if a ball makes contact with a fielder before the striker plays at the ball or passes the striker's wicket, it shall be a no ball. And again, I will explain that we're talking about the laws here solely, not your playing conditions. Any ball that bounces over the head height of the batter is a no ball under the laws of cricket. Uh, 21.11 just adds for the additional parts of where the umpires will call no ball. So laws 27.3 and 28.4, 28.5 we will get into later tonight. And laws 41.6, 7 and 8 we will do next week. Law 21.12 just talks to the revoking of the call of no ball. And obviously that is to happen if dead ball is called under any part of law 20.4. And law 21.13, no ball to override a wide, speaks for itself. 21.14 also speaks to itself. Ball does not become dead on the call of a no ball. 21.15, the penalty for a no ball is obviously a 1-run penalty. And unless the no ball is revoked, the penalty stands even if the batter is dismissed. and is in addition to any runs scored or a boundary allowance. 21-16 in terms of how a no ball and any runs resulting from a no ball is scored. We have the 1 run penalty scored as no ball extras, any runs off the bat credited to the striker, and any runs not off the bat scored as byes or leg byes as appropriate. And law 21-17, no ball not to count as part of the over. Again, pretty straightforward, I would hope. And 21-18 says you can't be out from a no ball except for hitting the ball twice, obstructing the field, or run out. And that is law 21 done. Got a couple of hands here. Jack, let's go to you first.
Good evening. I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Nope.
got you, Matt.
Oh, you can. Okay, great. Something happened during winter. I had some gentlemen from the subcontinent playing. Not many of them spoke English. I had a fellow bowling, and at the start of the over, the captain came up to him, and there was a discussion. And then next thing I knew, the captain came in and bowled the ball, but no one notified me there was a change of bowler. Is there a requirement to notify the umpire there's a change of bowler?
Yes. So as we were just talking about in terms of law 18, so a bowler needs to complete, law 17, I should say. The bowler needs to complete an over unless they are incapacitated or suspended. And they need to, if they're going to change that bowler, they need to inform you of the reason as to why. In terms of a penalty, the laws don't actually talk to that. However, I would probably consider if that was something that was a regular thing, you do have the ability to deal with unfair actions under the laws, under law 41.2, which would suggest that you issue the captain a first and final warning, and then any subsequent offences around that would result in a 5-run penalty.
Right, thank you. And just to clarify, the over hadn't actually commenced, so it was really a change of bowler without notifying the umpire before the ball had been bowled.
Okay, so for that, in that case, because the over hasn't started, they can change as many times as they want. They can make 11 changes if they really want to. But at each point, they are required to inform you of the arm and the mode of delivery. Obviously, it's good practice if they don't do that to clarify for yourself. But if they're deliberately withholding that information, they can be no-balled for that practice.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think they were intending to try and bend the rules or anything. I think it was just probably a lack of protocol, but at least he did come over the wicket. It wasn't around the wicket, to my surprise. Anyway, thanks for answering the question.
No dramas. Mr. Simmons, we'll go to you next, mate. Long time no speak.
Yeah, Nathan, good on you, mate. I just wanted to clarify the incident yesterday and make the point about the measure for the double bounce being the popping crease, irrespective if the ball passes the batter before it bounces twice.
Great question. So the law actually in its entirety talks to without previously touching the bat or the person of the striker. So it doesn't talk about whether it's in front or behind. So unless it physically touches the batter or their bat, it's still a no ball even though it's past them. up to the point of the popping crease.
Yeah. Some people may think that it's gone through on one bounce past the batter and it's not a no ball, but if it bounces before the popping crease, irrespective.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you, mate. No dramas. Samir.
Sorry, I was on mute. I have a question around the back foot no ball, where it specifically mentions that the back foot must not touch the return crease. So does this mean that it is okay to have a part of the back foot in the air, but not touching the return crease, but outside the return crease, similar to the front foot no ball?
Yes, so in terms of the back foot, it must land within and not touching the return crease. So being in the air doesn't actually meet the criteria for the law. So if it's not within the return crease, so it's in the air over the line, it's still a no ball.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean touching, but over is also a no ball.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Nothing in the chat. Excellent. All right, we will move on to law 22 on wides. Now, the first part of the wide law I've got highlighted for you because that has changed and has caused some consternation in competitions that have already taken place so far this season. So 22.1 in terms of judging a wide. If the bowler bowls a ball not being a no ball, the umpire will judge it wide if, according to the definition of 22.1.2, which basically talks to the ball will be considered as passing wide of the striker unless it's sufficiently within reach for them to be able to hit it with the bat by means of a normal cricket stroke. The ball passes wide of where the striker is standing or has stood at any point after the ball came into play for that delivery, and which also would have passed wide of the striker standing in a normal batting position. So for the purposes of clarity, the intent behind the change of the law is to deal with those batters who move laterally around the crease, particularly in short form cricket. Obviously, your playing condition will talk to where you need to adopt interpretation of wides. In limited overs cricket with the offside, you'll have that guideline which remains in place and nothing really changes in that aspect. But for leg side wides, it's basically come back to the laws of cricket. So, for example, if I take up guard on leg stump, and I decide to move away to the leg side and then come back to my position on leg stump to try and put the bowler off their rhythm, the wide for the purposes of a leg side wide will be the furthest point that I've stood on that leg side. So effectively, in terms of the advantage has gone back to the bowler rather than being toward the batter. Law 22.2. So a wide is to be called and signalled as soon as the ball passes the striker's wicket. The important thing to know, obviously, is that the wide call and signal is definitely done in two parts. So the first one is to the game, so from your position at the stumps at the bowler's end, and then subsequently to the scorers once the ball is dead. So keeping in mind, and we'll get into this shortly, that obviously when we call wide, the ball isn't dead and doesn't become dead if we call wide. We call and signal as soon as we possibly can once the ball passes the wickets at the striker's end. And then obviously we re-signal to the scorers as appropriate from there. For the purposes of the law, though, even though we don't call and signal a wide until it passes the striker's wicket, the ball is considered to be a wide ball from the instant that the bowler entered their delivery stride. We need to revoke the call of wide in the event that any contact is made between the ball and the striker's bat or person before it comes into contact with a fielder, or if the ball is also a no ball. As we discussed just before, no ball overrides any call of wide. 22.4, so a delivery is not a wide and not considered a wide if the striker moves to cause the ball to pass wide of them. So again, if we think about the moving inside of the ball, so if we're batting on leg stump and we move across to off stump, and that ball would have hit us, we're not going to call that a wide. And likewise, when the striker brings the ball sufficiently within their reach of being able to hit the ball by means of a normal cricketing stroke. So if we move to the offside to try and hit the ball that way, that offside guideline will move with us to the point of the return crease. As we just mentioned, the call of wide does not mean the ball is dead. Penalty for a wide is obviously a one-run penalty, and unless revoked, the penalty stands even if a batter is dismissed. Doesn't have to be the striker. And in addition to any runs scored or boundary allowance. The difference between a wide and a no ball in terms of how it's scored, all runs except any 5-run penalty incident is to be scored as wides. Obviously, a wide doesn't count as a valid ball on the over, and you can't be out from a wide unless you are out hit wicket, obstructing the field run out, or stumped. And that's the wide law. All right. Move into law 23, which is around buys and leg buys. Now, 23.1 talks to buys. Again, pretty straightforward. So any ball delivered that isn't a wide passes the striker without touching them, whether it be their bat or person. Any runs completed from that point or any boundary allowance is credited as buys. Obviously, if there's a no ball, that's buys can also be scored off a no ball. Leg buys. So in terms of a leg buy being able to be a legal leg buy, a striker must be attempting to either play at the ball with the bat or try to avoid being hit by the ball. So simply running down the wicket to pad the ball away or padding the ball away outside the leg stump does not constitute playing at the ball. So if they don't meet the conditions of that, so if they're not attempting to play at the ball or trying to avoid injury, you still allow the batters to run because we're not going to disadvantage the fielding side because the batters do something stupid. However, at the completion of the first run or when the ball reaches the boundary, if we're not going to award leg buys, we call dead ball, we disallow any runs, return the not out batters to their original end, signal no ball if it's applicable, and award any 5-run penalty that's applicable. And that's a really quick law. I love that one.
Nathan, we just had a question from Doug in the chat, just asking to clarify the answer to the question regarding the back foot no ball. So to clarify, if the back foot cannot be grounded on or over the return crease, but if it's elevated over the return crease, it's okay.
So I'm just going to go back to my notes here. So 21.5.1, just for the purposes of those reading along at home. So a bowler's back foot must land within and not touching the return crease, appertaining to their stated mode of delivery. So being raised above the return crease is not a fair delivery because you have not landed within the return crease.
Matt, it's Doug. We was talking
Yes, Doug.
touching. So if he's standing on the ball of his foot, inside the line and not touching the line, but his heel is over the line, I always thought that was a fair delivery. And so does Tom Smith.
Yeah.
Well,
because it says touching. It says touching the line.
Mm-hmm.
Touching is not above it.
But you also need to have your back foot land within the return crease. So you need to land within. So
normally the back foot could be he's on the ball of his foot. He's not flat-footed.
Mm-hmm.
He lands on the ball of his foot.
Mm-hmm.
And if his back foot is not parallel to the return crease, his back foot might be perpendicular to it. So his heel could be above the return crease, but if you drop down from it, it's crossing the line. But I thought that was okay.
So because that foot does not land within.
No, it lands within. It does. The foot does. It touches the ground and doesn't touch the return crease.
So the first touch, so you're saying he lands on the ball of his foot, yes, rather than.
Yep.
So it comes down to first touch, right?
Yeah. So if he lands on the ball of his foot and that's not touching the line at any point, then it's a fair delivery. It doesn't matter what happens after that.
Correct. It comes down to first touch. Yeah. That's correct.
So he can have his heel in the air over the return crease on the first touch of the ground, and that's a fair delivery, irrespective of what happens with his back foot after that.
Correct.
Okay. I just thought I heard you saying it was a no ball.
Sorry to interrupt on this again. I always had my doubts about whether the back foot should be touching or should it can be in the air. But the reason for the back foot no ball is that the back bowler does not get an unfair angle when bowling the delivery. So whether it is in the air or whether it is touching the ground or it is grounded, it still gives the bowler an unfair angle. So wouldn't it still be a no ball?
No. So it comes down to first touch, as we were just talking about there. So it really comes down to the angle of that foot.
Yeah. Matt, it's Doug again. We have a bowler that's continually pushing the limit. So he might bowl one ball close to the stumps, and he's a spin bowler, and he moves across, between the return crease and the closest stump. So he will move across, and he gets very close sometimes. It's hard to watch. It's hard to watch him. We've called him a few times, but we've always worked on the principle that if he's on the ball of his foot, long as his first time he touches the ground, no part of his back foot is touching the return crease.
As Nathan's outlined in the law 21.5.1, it's all about where is that back foot grounded. And so long as it's grounded within, inside the return crease, then that's fine. So again, it just comes back to umpires being vigilant about that when the bowler is in their delivery stride.
Yep, thanks.
No worries.
Sorry, that was just a perfect opportunity for me to have some water. All right, we'll get into law 24, which is around fielders' absences and substitutes. We did touch on this very, very briefly at the back end of last week's session, but we'll touch on it in complete detail for tonight. So law 24, you need to read in conjunction with law 25, because obviously with unserved penalty time that's incurred by a fielder, that could quite possibly carry over into their batting innings. So when you allow a substitute and a player incurs penalty time, you need to make sure that you understand the requirements of penalty time under this law and also the next law that we'll cover. So law 24.1 says we can have substitute fielders, providing that the fielder has become injured or ill, and this occurred during the match, and for any other wholly acceptable reason. Any substitute obviously needs to be cleared through the umpires, and that decision is entirely up to the umpires as to whether a substitute is allowed. Substitutes cannot bowl or act as captain, but they may act as the wicketkeeper with the consent of the umpires. Again, you need to be abundantly clear on what your playing conditions allow versus what the law allows. And a nominated player, as in not a substitute, part of the original 11, may bowl or field at any later point in the match, even though a substitute has previously acted for them, subject to the next two slides. So this is the fun one. So fielders being absent or leaving the field of play. So if a fielder is absent for an acceptable reason, as I said, we'll be informed of the reason as to why. Once they're off the field, they will not come back onto the field during play without the consent of the umpire, and they won't be permitted to bowl until they have been back on the field for a period of time, otherwise known as penalty time. Penalty time under the laws is capped at 90 minutes. And scheduled breaks in play cannot count towards penalty time served. Unscheduled breaks in play, the stoppage time in those can count towards penalty time served, providing the player notifies the umpires of their ability to participate in the game again and was either on the field before the unscheduled break occurs or takes the field at the completion of the unscheduled break. So, for the purposes of clarity, let's say that a bowler goes off with a sore hamstring. They're off the field for an hour. They come back on the field. They're on the field for 20 minutes, and we then have to go off for rain. That rain delay can count towards that bowler's penalty time, providing they were on the field before the rain break. And if they weren't on the field, it can count towards it, providing they come and inform you of their ability to participate and then subsequently take the field when play recommences. It's not simply good enough to go, yep, I'm good enough to play again, and then for them not to come back out after that unscheduled break. Penalty time is also carried forward into subsequent days and innings of the match as applicable. Penalty time isn't incurred if the player has suffered an external blow during the match. So important to understand external blow as in got hit in the head by a ball, internal injury, torn hamstring, muscle issue, those sorts of things. So no penalty time if they suffer an external blow during the match, and if the player is absent or left the field for other wholly acceptable reasons that do not include illness or internal injury. And that is, again, at the decision of the umpire. If someone decides to leave the field and they return without the permission of the umpires. As soon as they come into contact with the ball whilst it's in play, the ball is immediately dead. The umpires will signal no ball or wide if applicable, award 5 runs to the batting side. Any runs completed by the batters and the run in progress, if they've crossed, are to be scored. The ball does not count as one in the over. It's one of those rare scenarios where the ball doesn't count as one on the over, even though the striker has played at it. And last but not least, the incident is reported to the governing body of the competition you're umpiring in. Before I get to questions on that, I am going to go through the first bit of Law 25, which talks to the batter's eligibility around penalty time, and then we'll get into questions before we hit runners, if we've got any. So 25.1, so obviously only a nominated player can bat in any innings or act as a runner. Commencement of a batter's innings, so a batter has commenced their innings at either the start of the innings or a resumption of play after the call of time. Once that call of play is made, otherwise the batter's innings commences when they first step onto the field of play. A batter, however, may not commence their innings if they have unserved penalty time to serve, unless their side has lost 5 wickets. Any unserved penalty time that remains at the end of a team's innings is also carried forward to the next and subsequent innings of the match. So, for example, let's say that same bowler, so he had 40 minutes of penalty time to serve when we got to that rain break. That rain break was 20 minutes, so we're now down to 20 minutes of penalty time to serve. The original batting side are now all out, and that bowler's captain has decided to forfeit their innings. That bowler still has 20 minutes of penalty time to serve in the 3rd innings of that match, so he still cannot bowl for another 20 minutes. Now, before we get into runners, I'm just going to check. We have no questions. That's good. That's good. All right, cool. Batters retiring. So a batter may retire their innings at any point when the ball is dead. Again, the umpires are to be notified of the reason for that retirement. If the batter retires because of illness, injury, or any other unavoidable cause, the batter is entitled to resume their innings at any point, providing it's at a fall of a wicket or subsequent retirement of another batter. And if not resumed, they are recorded as retired, not out. If the batter retires for any other reason, they're only entitled to resume their innings again at the fall of a wicket or subsequent retirement of another batter with the consent of the opposing captain. And in the very likely event that that innings is not resumed, they're recorded as retired out. Now, runners. Really, really fun time for anyone who's had to have runners in a match. Again, you need to be very, very clear on when runners are allowed in your competitions, because the laws allow for runners at any time in innings, whereas most competitions stipulate at the fall of the 9th wicket or things to that nature. So you need to be abundantly clear on when runners apply to your competition. But for the purposes of the laws, runners are permitted if the batter has sustained an injury that affects their ability to run, and this injury occurred during the match. So it's not sufficient to rock up on a Saturday with a torn hamstring, going into the match with a torn hamstring and going, it's okay, I'll just get a runner. That's not allowed. A runner will be a member of the batting side, and wherever possible have already completed their innings. Where that's not possible, i.e. an opening batter requires a runner, as soon as circumstances change such that a dismissed batter can act as runner, so at the fall of the first wicket, then the runner must be changed immediately. Outside of that particular scenario, a runner can only be changed with the consent of the umpires. The runner must wear external protective equipment equivalent to that worn by the batter for whom they run, and must carry a bat, and must also not have any unserved penalty time. (25.6), and I would very much like, and I know it's getting late, but it's time to do some reading. So 25.6 is around the dismissal and conduct of a batter and their runner. So a batter who has a runner suffers the penalty for any infringement of the laws by the runner, as if the batter had been responsible for that infringement. And that mainly refers to, in the 99.9% of the time, obstructing the field and run-out decisions. When a batsman who has a runner and they are the striker, they remain subject to all of the laws and liable to the penalties that any infringements of them demand. When a batter who has a runner is the striker, their ground is always at the wicketkeeper's end. So irrespective of if that injured batter hits one down to mid-off and goes, yeah, every other game that I play, I need to run to the other end. It's not good enough for that injured batter to make good their ground at the bowler's end. They must return to the wicketkeeper's end. If the striker who has a runner is in their ground, but the runner is out of their ground at the wicketkeeper's end, obviously they're out, run out. And if the striker who has a runner is out of their ground and the wicket at the wicketkeeper's end is fairly put down, the striker is liable to run out under run out or stumped laws. And in the event that the striker, as in the injured batter, not the runner, is dismissed, either run out or stumped, any runs are disallowed, not out batsmen return to their original end, and 5-run penalties are the only thing that can be awarded to the batting side. Law 25.7 talks to the restrictions on the striker's runners. So once the ball comes into play, the striker's runner will always have part of their person or bat grounded behind the popping crease until the ball reaches the striker or passes the popping crease, whichever comes first. Similar to what we're talking about with the leg byes not awarded, if the runner is in contravention to this, we don't immediately call dead ball because the batting side have done something stupid. We wait till that first run is completed or the ball reaches the boundary. And we call dead ball unless there is a catch that's about to be completed, in which case we allow that play to take place before calling dead ball. We then disallow all runs to the batting side and return batters to their original end. So runners are a particularly difficult one. From a jovial point of view, highly recommend that you just make sure that you get rid of an injured batter ASAP. I don't get hit on the pads. And move on with your day like that never happened. Law 25.8, strikers' right to play the ball. So moving away from runners, So the striker has the right to play the ball or make a legitimate second strike after the ball has been delivered without interference from the wicketkeeper or fielders. And again, like we spoke about before, the striker may only attempt to play the ball and has the right to play the ball if some of their bat or person, whether grounded or raised, remains within the pitch area. Once they leave the pitch area, it's a call and signal of dead ball. All right, Law 26, practice on the field. We're going to get through this one pretty quick, I would hope. I think it's pretty much common sense around 26.1. We don't ever practice on the pitch. And there should also be no practice on the pitch square unless approved by the umpires. Practice on the outfield is permitted outside of match times, i.e. when play is actually taking place. Outside of those times, practice is permitted on the outfield unless the umpires believe that will cause significant deterioration to the condition of the outfield. We all umpire community cricket. Please do not bar practice on the outfield outside of match time. When I say match time, that is when play is taking place. So practice on the outfield can happen during scheduled intervals. But during match time, practice in the outfield is permitted, providing that only the fielders nominated or that are allowed on the field are engaged in such practice and no ball other than the match ball is used. Keeping in mind that they're still responsible for not changing the condition of the ball as part of that practice. 26.3, trial run-ups are allowed providing that it doesn't contravene any time wasting or damaging of the pitch. In the event, though, that someone contravenes part of Law 26, and it doesn't matter whether that's part of practicing on the pitch, or practicing in the outfield or practicing on the square. First offence is to warn the player that the practice is not permitted, and then any subsequent offences by either that player or any player on the same side. 5 penalty runs awarded to the opposing side and a report goes into the governing body. All right, we are officially on the home stretch because we've got 2 to go. And we're going to finish things off by talking about the wicketkeeper and the fielder. So Law 27 obviously permits the wicketkeeper to wear gloves and external leg guards. However, 27 talks to the gloves themselves. So Law 27 says that there'll be no webbing between the fingers except joining the index finger and thumb where webbing is inserted as a means of support. And that must be a single piece of non-stretch material that has no reinforcement or tucks. You will find in the Appendix E covers off what a wicket-keeping glove should look like. Uh, 27.3 talks to the position of the wicketkeeper. So they will remain wholly behind the stumps at the striker's end from the moment the ball comes into play until the ball touches the bat or person of the striker or passes the wicket at the striker's end, or the striker attempts a run. In the event that that's contravened, and no ball shall be called. And that includes when a keeper is up to the stumps. The wicketkeeper should be no balled if they put their gloves in front of the stumps, irrespective of whether they actually come into contact with the ball. Uh, 27.4 is a change under the 2022 rewrite of the laws. So after the ball comes into play and before it reaches the striker, it is unfair if the wicketkeeper significantly alters their position in relation to the striker's wicket, except for the following. So movement of a few paces forward for a slower delivery, unless in so doing brings them within reach of the wicket. lateral movement in response to the direction in which the ball has been delivered, or movement in response to the stroke that the striker is playing or that their actions suggest they intend to play. However, Law 27.3 still applies, so they need to remain behind the stumps. In the event of any unfair movement by the keeper, so for example, they realise it's going to be a slower delivery and significantly alter their position so that they're now in reach of the wicket and can affect a stumping. That is unfair movement. In the event of any form of unfair movement, though, by the wicketkeeper, either umpire will call and signal dead ball and award a 1-run penalty if applicable for a wide or a no ball, award 5 penalty runs to the batting side, inform the stakeholders, so the fielding captain, batters and the batting captain, and report through to the governing body. Law 27.5 just talks about restrictions on, or further restrictions on, the actions of the wicketkeeper. So as we spoke about earlier, the striker has a right to play the ball and to guard their wicket. And if a wicketkeeper interferes with that, the dead ball should be called. However, keep in mind that if the action of interfering is deemed willful, then you need to consider actions under Law 41.4, which we'll get into next week. In the event that the striker interferes with the wicketkeeper, so again, the batter is allowed to play the ball and legitimately defend their wicket. If the striker interferes with the keeper, they will be not out except for under Law 37, obstructing the field, which we will get into next week as well. Now, the last law for the night is Law 28, just around fielders. So 28.1, so the keeper, or Law 27 that talks to the keeper, allows for gloves and external leg guards. Law 28 says the fielder can't have that. And any protection for hands or fingers may be worn only with the consent of the umpires. 28.2, there's not a change here, but I do want to make it abundantly clear. So a fielder may field the ball with any part of their person. However, they will be deemed to have fielded the ball illegally if, while the ball is in play, they willfully use anything other than part of their person to field the ball, extend their clothing with their hands and use that to field the ball, discard a piece of clothing, equipment, or any other object which subsequently makes contact with the ball. It's for that to be clarified, though, it's not illegal fielding if the ball makes contact with that piece of clothing or equipment that has accidentally fallen from the fielder's person. However, in the event that they illegally field the ball, so for example, let's say in chasing a ball to the boundary from mid-wicket, a player intentionally takes their cap off and throws it on the ground. And the fielder manages to collect the ball within the boundary and throw it back, and the ball hits their cap. That is illegal fielding. And in that scenario, that ball immediately becomes dead. Any penalties for no ball or wide stand, any runs completed by the batters will be credited, plus the run in progress if they've crossed at the instance of offence. The ball does not count as one of the over. 5 runs is awarded to the batting side. Obviously, we inform the stakeholders and then put a report into the governing body. We've talked about Law 28.3 a fair bit tonight, but this is what it's all about. So protective helmets belonging to the fielding side. So when they're not being used, protective helmets are to be placed on the ground if they need to be above the surface, so they can be hidden away in if there's sufficient space around the square to do so in those little hidey holes that you'll see on TV. But if that can't be done, they need to be put behind the wicketkeeper and in line with both sets of stumps. In the event the ball strikes the helmet, that ball becomes immediately dead. The umpire will signal no ball or wide and award 5 penalty runs to the batting side. Any runs completed and the run in progress, if the batters have crossed, are to be scored. Keeping in mind, though, the 5-run penalty for balls hitting the helmet are discarded when we don't award leg buys. So if someone pads the ball away and it happens to go behind the keeper and hit the helmet, there's no 5-run penalty. When there's restrictions on the striker's runner, or when Law 34 hit the ball twice, which we'll get into next week, is in play, no 5 penalty runs is awarded in that scenario. If those scenarios are in play, all runs to the batting side are disallowed. Not out batters are returned to their original ends. 28.4, this is where you'll often find your things for limited overs fielding restrictions. But the only thing that's in the law is that no more than 2 fielders, excluding the keeper, can be behind the popping crease on the onside. And for the purposes of clarity, a fielder is considered behind the popping crease unless the whole of their person is in front of the line. Again, pretty straightforward, but no fielder is to have any part of their person grounded on or extended over the pitch until such time as the ball has made contact with the striker's bat or person, or has passed the striker's bat. And similarly to in Law 27, there's been a rewrite of 28.6. So any movement by a fielder, excluding the keeper after the ball comes into play and before the ball reaches the striker, is unfair, except for minor adjustments to stance or position in relation to the striker's wicket. Movement by any fielder other than a close fielder towards the striker or the striker's wicket that does not significantly alter the position of that fielder, and movement by any fielder in response to the stroke that the striker is playing or that their actions suggest they intend to play. In the event of that unfair movement, so for example, rather than walking in with the bowler, a fielder is walking backward. Dead ball, 5-run penalty to the batting side. We inform the stakeholders and we put a report into the governing body. And that, my friends, is night 2 done. I will throw to questions. John, you've got a question. You're on mute, mate.
Yeah, just going back to that law on equipment, we had a situation in one of our finals last year where a close-in fielder had what looked like a set of wicketkeeper's pads on under his trouser legs instead of just shin pads. I approached the player and the captain of the fielding team, and I suggested that wasn't in the spirit of the game, and he took them off. Later, he got hit on the shins, not very hard, but my discussion with my co-umpire at the time was, and I led this more than him, I felt that it would have been a breach of the allowable equipment, and it would have been a 5-run penalty if he had been hit with these pads on. In your opinion, was I right, or was I correct or incorrect? But they were clearly above the knee. They were like the pads that a wicketkeeper wears often, but they were clearly as high as above the knee.
Yeah, so the law talks to the wicketkeeper being the only fielder permitted to wear external leg guards.
Yep.
There is actually nothing that suggests they can't wear internal leg guards. Now, I'm not going to get into semantics around what constitutes external versus internal. Sounds like you used a bit of common sense there, but from that perspective, if they're internal, as in underneath the pants, there's really not a whole lot you can do about it.
Okay. All right.
So
everybody accepted it at the time, but I just thought I'd just double check it right now.
Yeah. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer there, to be honest with you, John.
Thank you.
No worries.
Now, Nathan, we had another question from Doug in the chat. They had an instance and the officiating umpire where the wicketkeeper was way wide of the stumps and was in a slips position. If that is not a normal wicket-keeping position, then under 27.1, he is considered a fielder and not a wicket-keeper, has no right to gloves, etc. I assume there would be penalties in that regard.
So,
your thoughts?
Yep. So in terms of where that penalty would come in, obviously you make a judgment under law 27 as to whether that person is acting as a wicketkeeper. By the sounds of it, doesn't really sound like he was. It sounds like he was just acting as a fielder, in which case he needs to forego his right to gloves and external leg guards if he wishes to continue fielding there. Obviously, under 28.2, if he's foregone his rights to acting as the wicketkeeper, that would be a 5-run penalty under 28.2 in terms of illegal fielding. Yes.
All right.
I think I did it in 10 minutes less. Oh, Mr. Shaw. You have a question?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone saw, not really a question, that happened in the English one-day final yesterday about the 5-run penalty. Did anyone see that, where the fielder picked up the discarded wicketkeeper's glove and caught the ball as it was returned by the wicketkeeper who had fielded it? Yeah, it's on all the news channels today, to a point where Mike Atherton actually said that he had no idea that was a law. So yeah, something to have a look at in the news.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, last season also reared its head in a Shield match at the Gabba, where Matt Renshaw was penalised for doing pretty much exactly the same thing. So yeah, really important to understand that, yeah, there's probably no malice behind it. There's no disadvantage to the batting side. But irrespective to all of that, it is a contravention of the law and needs to be dealt with as such. All right, I'll take it back. I think I did it in 9 minutes less than last week then.
You have done well. Well, if there are no further questions, thank you everybody for your time tonight and for investing into your umpiring. We'll be back next Monday night at 6:30 for the final instalment, and we wish you all well for the week ahead.
Thank you.